Hey everyone, welcome to the Durable Business Podcast. My name is Chase Murdoch, and I wanted to weigh in with a quick note before we get into today's interview. First, today's conversation is hosted by a good friend of mine, Kyle Poll. He's the CEO of GetOut, which if you're in Utah, you've definitely heard of GetOut Pass. They recently merged with Pogo Pass and rebranded to GetOut. Kyle has been kind enough to really support Durable. He serves on the advisory board of Durable's ETA chapter. And today's conversation only happened because of him and because of the passion he has for something that's really important to me as well, which is telling the other side of the story of business and ETA, acquiring a business as a form of entrepreneurship. If you're not careful about where you get your information, you might be under the impression that acquiring a business or just business in general is easy and that it's a walk in the park and that your pathway to success is sure. And it's anything but that. If you've been doing this as long as I have, you know that every successful business, every successful entrepreneur has really hard moments, inflection points, moments of doubt, sometimes full-on failure moments, and that can include bankruptcy. Today's conversation, Kyle has a long discussion with four exceptional entrepreneurs who have all faced some of those moments up close and personal. And I'm really grateful to those four guests for their friendship and for their willingness to get vulnerable and talk about that side of business. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. It's an important one at Durable. It's an important one to Kyle, as you'll hear as he facilitates the conversation. And while it's a long episode, I think it's well worth your time. Thanks for listening, and I'll hand it over to Kyle.
Okay, looks like we're live. Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have you here. Excited to talk about a very interesting conversation today. The conversation of ETA always comes around to this exciting vision of being able to buy a business that is an amazing opportunity for many folks, but I think there's a lot of misperceptions in the market. I think a lot of people see this as an easy way for passive income, that you can buy this amazing business that's churning off all this cash flow, easily pay the debt, have someone else operate it, and sit on a beach somewhere sipping Mai Tais while somebody else does all the hard work. And we're here today to talk about, to dispel that myth and help a lot of folks understand what it's really like to buy a business and what it's like to operate that business. So my name is Kyle Poll. I'm the host today, and very excited to learn from this amazing panel we have of folks who have been in the trenches, who have gone out there and bought businesses and felt what it feels like to operate these businesses and have ridden the roller coaster, the emotional roller coaster that is ETA. And so as a brief introduction of myself, we bought a business called GetOut Pass. We then combined it with another business called Pogo Pass. And over the last 16 months, I've been the CEO of this combined business that we just rebranded to GetOut. It's been an exciting journey, but it's been a hard journey. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But before we do, we'd love to get to know our panel a little bit. So maybe if we can do some brief intros, that would be super helpful. Let's start with Blake, and then we'll move to Caroline.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm Blake Harber. I'm the CEO of Routine Holdings. We're a holding company of kind of three separate businesses, two of which were small business acquisitions. One is an agency that we built from the ground up for go-to-market and early stage software businesses. The other two acquisitions we made, the first one was actually a vending machine business that we've kind of transitioned into a fully autonomous vending machine business and have scaled decently well. We won't talk about that one as much today. And then the second one was Appleton Electronics Group, which is a 40-year-old independent distributor of electronic components. It's been a wild journey the last 3 years in that business. We'll talk about that one in depth today.
Excited to hear more about it. Thanks, Blake. Good to have you. Caroline.
Hello, Caroline Chapelaine, CEO of Northstar Photonics. We carved this company out about 3.5 years ago. We design and manufacture navigation equipment for the defense industry. The company is actually located in San Jose. I live in Utah, so I'm a commuting CEO. So I'll have a lot to talk about, the challenges of not getting to be literally in the business every day, and then the uniqueness of having Uncle Sam for a customer.
Very excited to learn more about it, Caroline. And I think a lot of listeners will be very interested in that, remote leadership role, because, a lot of folks end up wanting to acquire something where they live or close to where they live, and they realize that significantly limits the world of acquisitions they can make. So a lot of folks are interested in learning more about, can I do the remote things? So we're excited to hear more from you, Caroline. Thank you for being on. Let's go to Andrew, and then we'll finish up with Taylor.
All right, Andrew Heer, former CEO of Summit Mountain Cleaning. So I did two acquisitions. First one was a commercial cleaning business in 2021. The second was a carpet cleaning business in 2023, both primarily located up in Park City, Utah. Merged those together, rebranded everything, and spectacularly, as we've talked about, things did not go well, and we'll have a lot to share about that once we dig into things.
Really appreciate your willingness to be so open with us, Andrew, and to share your journey. And I personally am very excited because I'm a former carpet cleaner myself. I don't know if you knew that, but
Nice.
spent
Okay.
a few years with All-American Chem Dry. So
There you go.
excited to hear more, Andrew. Thanks for joining us. And finally, Taylor Nielsen.
Taylor Nielsen, CEO of Walton Trailers. I acquired a 50-year-old manufacturing business, and similar to Caroline, I'm not state state away or a couple states away, but I bought a business that's 2 hours away from where I currently live. So I have some of those same struggles of not being in the business on a day-to-day basis. I'm up there usually once a week, but happy to share more about acquiring a small manufacturer when things like tariffs and everything else are running through the system. So
Awesome, Taylor. I know a lot about your journey and excited to learn even more. Let's stay with you, and we'll go through each one of you. One of the things I know a lot of listeners will be very interested in knowing is, they're looking to buy businesses themselves, so they want to know about the deal itself. How did you find the business? Tell us more, anything you can about the economics of, size of business, what you paid, what the acquisition looked like, the ownership structure, debt, anything you can share with us about the structure of the deal that you initially structured, I think would be really helpful for listeners. So maybe we'll start with you, Taylor, and we'll work reverse order back through the folks.
yeah, so I mean, I went through the same, like a lot of people will go through this process when they first start looking into ETA as an option of, you see something and like the number on the screen, whether you're looking at biz, buy, sell or broker listings or whatever, you're like, oh yeah, like I could realistically, be fine off of $500,000 a year, without really acknowledging that that's not like the true number once you burden it with debt and, factor in, you're going to need to hire more people and everything else like that. And so I initially started at the lower end of that, where, a big reason a lot of people get into this is because they want autonomy. They've worked in a corporate job for a long time. They've always had bosses. One myth to dispel right up front is that even if you buy a company, you still have a boss somewhere. It's usually turns into a customer, as opposed to, or investors or something else, as opposed to, just a manager. But after kind of going down the rabbit hole a little bit, I kind of started landing in this range of, I wanted to find a business that was in the, $1 to $2 million of, SDE or EBITDA, depending on what you're looking at. But I ended up finding my business. I did a ton of outreach on my own. I definitely went through brokers, and I would recommend that a lot of people do use that as a channel. But I did a lot of my own outreach, and in the process of doing so, I came across a group of guys that were doing an HVAC roll up, and I had looked at a bunch of HVAC businesses and decided to share my deal flow with them, and they ultimately introduced me to the broker that was representing the business that I acquired, and so from start to finish, I think the search to close process for me took about 11 months. So just shy of a year. Going into the deal, we didn't do as, we definitely went higher on the leverage side, but not as high as some of the SBA deals you'll see or hear about, where it was like 90% debt, 10% 10% equity. We were about 25% equity, 75% debt. I went into it with a small family office type investor as like my anchor investor. Had a couple of friends and family, chip in some money, and then me and a business partner that joined me later in the search process kicked in the rest of the capital. And from a size perspective, when I bought my business, the business was coming off of COVID highs, so different. It looks different now than it looked during COVID, which we can talk about a little bit later, I assume. But at its peak, it was doing about 10 million of revenue, and it was just north of 2 million of EBITDA.
Great. Thanks, Taylor. That's super helpful. Let's jump on to Andrew. Andrew, tell us about your deals.
Yeah, so my background is private equity. I was running a family office here locally in Lehigh, and wanted to diversify the portfolio a bit and find that small blue collar business that I could operate in the periphery with a manager while still maintaining my full-time position at the family office. And so I started looking summer of 2021. And the first deal I came across, I think it was on KSL. And it was a remote or a mobile detailing business. And I got kind of excited about that because I had a friend who was in the industry, and I felt like there was some synergies there that maybe we could do a merger and really blow it up. And that was a really, really sketchy opportunity as I dug into it. There was zero financials. There was nothing. Not like a Stripe account, nothing. So I avoided that like the Black Plague. And so that was July 2021. And then in end of August, beginning of September, I started to venture more into the broker side of looking for businesses. And that's when I was introduced to the commercial cleaning company up in Park City. And it was similar to what Taylor said. You should always, use a broker, use as many outlets or pathways as you can to find a business. But my experience with brokers has, in both my acquisitions, was absolutely horrendous. It was super frustrating. I just felt like the information was being withheld, and things were being manipulated so that they could get that deal across the finish line, so to speak. So I've had a very different experience with brokers versus some other people. And that it was a very small deal. I wasn't looking for anything huge. I wanted something that was small enough that it wasn't going to take too much of my time away from the family office. And so I found the commercial cleaning company was, I think, about 450,000 list price, and spinning off 170 to 180 SDE. So for me, that was a nice little side stream of income. And we closed relatively quickly. I had just purchased a home during the COVID time period, and I bought the ugliest house on the street, rehabbed it, got a bunch of equity, pulled that out, and used that as my down payment for the SBA loan. And then we were off to the races. And luckily, we were just coming out of all like the COVID restrictions, because our largest customer was Vail Ski Resorts, and the hospitality and travel industry was hit particularly hard when it came to COVID. And so I probably got a little bit of a discount just because the business wasn't doing as well the previous 2 years, and they were starting to come out of it. But the second acquisition I did, I had hired a general manager, and I'm kind of a deal junkie. Being in private equity, you're being put in front of deals on a daily basis. And one of the interns in our office was like, "Hey, there's this carpet cleaning company up in Park City that would be a good little bolt on for the business. And I was like, you're absolutely right. I'm going to do it. And I reached out and could not get a hold of the broker at all. Wouldn't call me back, wouldn't email me, wouldn't text me. And so I was like, how hard could this be? I'm just going to go to Google and start calling carpet cleaning companies in Park City. And you're, as hard as it is to believe, the first number that I dialed, it was the company that was listed. And it was an older lady, and like the quintessential boomer business, that it was 30 years old. Her and her brother started it back in 88, I believe. And I was like, hey, is your business for sale? And she was like, yeah, why? And I'm like, well, I'm trying to buy it. And she had no idea that the broker was kind of putting up an iron curtain there. And she's like, well, we have an LOI from another acquirer, but I'll keep you posted. A week later, she called me, and because the broker was not cooperating, we just decided to push him to the side. And I went up there and we just went mano a mano with the deal. And I was like, listen, I wasn't planning on buying a business. So I don't have a ton of cash on hand. So I can't necessarily give you a big down payment. So they were willing to sell their finance. And the purchase price of the business was $350K. They were doing about the same as the other business in SDE, 175, 190, somewhere in there. And so I said, let me pay you 10 grand a month for 3 months as a down payment, and then we'll do the seller's note. She agreed to it, and it was a 5-year, 10% note. And yeah, I just put a bunch more stress and responsibility on my shoulders that I was definitely not prepared for in that moment in time.
Wow. Well, I mean, on paper, it sounds like a sweetheart of a deal because you're getting all seller financing. You're not putting a lot up front. This is kind of like what a lot of ETA entrepreneurs are dreaming of. But
100%.
I'm excited to hear more about how this actually turns out. So before we do, though, let's hear from Caroline. Thank you, Andrew. That's super helpful.
Yeah, so my background, I was in the Army for 4.5 years, and then I worked in industry, working for some of the large defense primes here in Utah. And so my thesis going through was to find a company that was in defense manufacturing, because that was my knowledge. And I knew not a lot of folks were searching in that space and had a lot of confidence in government contracts, which can be super complex. I was a self-funded searcher. At least at the time, I thought it was important for me to be able to run my own show. And I also knew investors, now times have changed, but at the time, investors usually weren't interested in either defense contracting nor manufacturing, which is CapEx heavy. So I did all the searching that everyone's kind of mentioned here, the brokers, biz buy sell, going door to door. Looked at a lot of companies, but this one, Northstar Photonics, that I own now, came through a friend of mine, a classmate, while I was getting my MBA. I told everyone I knew that I was doing the search in the hopes that somebody knew the business. And so my friend knew about this little defense arm of a larger company that they were planning to shut down. And he and another friend of ours went in together to sort of carve out this defense part of a larger company. It was a biomed company that didn't want it. And so the three of us put together a deal. I know numbers are important. The challenge was, because this was a carve out, there were no real exact numbers, no financials on this part of the business. The larger company that was running it didn't have an interest in necessarily counting the dollars. They just didn't want it. So we had some estimates because one of the partners was the head engineer, and so he understood a lot what was going into the contracts. And so I'd guesstimate at its largest, maybe 1 to 2 million revenue. Who knows, EBITDA? And now looking back, I would think probably in the negatives, because it just wasn't it wasn't a sweet deal, but I didn't learn that till long after. And the other portion about my deal search was from taking classes, from reading the gospel, the books, the podcasts and everything on ETA. I probably took it too much to heart that you take whatever deal you can and make it work, because it's really, really hard to close a deal. Not to say I went into it blind, but I think like most folks, you start getting rose-colored glasses and getting excited about the deal. And so I took this deal knowing it had a lot of hair on it and there was a lot of risk. And I am still paying the price for taking such a risky deal. But I've gotten to run a company and gotten to do a deal, which I'm very thankful for. So the deal was basically the three partners, all individuals, no organizations, no VCs, no outside funding. We all put money in the pot to buy out the company. We worked a couple deals with existing customers to help front load some contracts to get cash in early. And so it was I forget the exact numbers, but more or less paid for half the deal up front and then did a seller earnout. We found within 6 months, and I'll get more into the details, but just to give the framework, we didn't use the SBA loan up front, but quickly found we ran out of cash, and so ultimately ended up doing the SBA 7A, which is very typical in the ETA world, to help finance cash flow in those first struggling months and year of the business.
What a ride. Can't wait to dive in a little bit deeper, Caroline, and learn more what that journey has looked like. But a very unique deal in that, I don't know if I've heard of too many that were a carve out, where as opposed to buying an independent business, you bought a portion of a larger business with very limited financials, which makes the diligence super tough, right? And so we'll learn more about what that looked like and how that resulted. But thanks for the overview and can't wait to dive in. And last but not least, Blake, very excited to hear your story.
Thanks, Kyle. So I spent kind of the last 15 years in high growth venture-backed tech. And when I left my most recent opportunity, we'd grown really fast and had an opportunity to kind of step away. I got 4 young kids and thought I needed to kind of take a break, 6 months, and started consulting and doing advisory work for early stage startups. Did that for about 6 months and just started to get this itch of probably too much Instagram time or TikTok. And I was like, cool, I'm going to buy a small business because Cody Sanchez told me to. And I think I got scared a little bit of like, oh gosh, I'm like, all of my equity, everything is all tied up in tech and who knows what's going to happen. And so ended up finding our first acquisition, which was our vending machine business. I think it was listed on BizBuySell or something. And it was only up there a very short time. I ended up getting it was listed by the seller, ended up getting his cell phone number, called him. It was under contract immediately by somebody else. And I basically called the guy every 30 days to just like see how things were going, check in, kind of built a relationship. Sure enough, it fell out. And we wrote him an offer within like 24 hours on that deal. And we ended up closing on that in about 30 days. Pretty seamless on that transition. We did that for about 3 months, and for some reason decided we should buy a second business because that makes sense. And we was still looking the whole time. Ended up like over the course of 9 months, probably had looked at 300-ish deals, and a lot of just the traditional stuff, meeting with brokers, cold outbound, BizBuySell, all the things. And I had found one very early on, which was Appleton Electronics Group, in my search. And when I got in touch with the broker, it was also under contract. And I had a very similar experience of like, well, I'm just gonna keep calling this broker to like see what happens with this thing. And at the time, it was listed about 1.2 million of revenue, about 450 of EBITDA. I was like it was a 2-person business, 40-year-old business in an industry I know nothing about, by the way. And was like, man, that like looks amazing, right? Like pretty much a work from home business, essentially brokering pretty much every deal. And I just thought like looks phenomenal on paper. And so I ended up talking to this broker for the first half of the year, basically every month. It had gone under contract 2 separate times, had fallen out, and eventually convinced the broker like to, as it fell out the second time, like, let's just get me in front of the seller, would love to meet him. And we met on like a Monday for lunch, and this had fallen out on Friday, met on Monday for lunch, went to lunch again on Wednesday, and it was back under contract with us, an LOI on like Friday, and started going down the SBA route. was in the process at that point, and I think quickly realized how long the SBA process was going to take, having never gone through it, and like I just didn't understand any of it. And I was like, man, I have to learn how to do this, let alone like go through it to even get this deal done. And decided to go raise debt, and basically friends and family, small family office, and I think we paid about 1.1 million for it. And we brought about 40% cash to the table because I just didn't want to get as our debt service as good as possible. And we ended up closing about 30 days later. And
Wow.
that's led us down a rabbit hole of a very interesting experience the last couple of years.
And we will dive into that for sure. Thank you, Blake. And if any of you don't follow or are connected with Blake, he does a great job of sharing on LinkedIn really honest stories about his journey. And that's what we hope we'll get into today is honest stories about what this journey feels like. And one thing that I'm tracking, if I was to summarize what I heard from the four of you, is that getting a deal done in the first place is very hard. And from all four stories, I heard a lot of hustle. I didn't hear any stories of like, I got on BizBuySell, I found the perfect business, called the broker, they put me in touch with the owner, we had a conversation, a month later it closed. Getting a deal done is very hard. The majority of people who enter the world of ETA don't end up closing a deal at all. So if you're entering this for the first time, you should understand that. If you really want to close a deal, it's going to be hard to get a deal done. What's even harder is getting a good deal done. So we're going to jump into that a little bit. And I want to share something. I think Taylor was the one who actually shared this with me originally. He said, searching for a business is a little bit like training for a marathon. And then getting it under LOI is like getting to the starting line of the marathon. Once you get it under LOI, you're like, yes, I did it. It's like, no, you just have begun once you get it under LOI. And then you run this thing and you're like, oh my gosh, getting this thing closed is like running a marathon. It is really hard to get a deal done. And then all of a sudden you finish and you're like, finally, I own the business, I've done it. And it's almost like someone then hands you an entry form and says, congratulations, you just qualified for an Ironman. And guess what? You start today. And so as you run through the finish line, it's like, put on your swimsuit and jump in the water. You're swimming already. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what that Ironman feels like. What does it look like when you dive in? And so let's start with you, Caroline. What I would love to know is, what did that feel like when you jumped in? What first broke, and how long did it take for realities to set in once you entered the Ironman?
Yeah, that was a really good analogy. I like that. It feels very true. For me, I knew I had, I think any leader will say this. I was a decently trained leader and a lot of experience in the Army. And so I knew I had a little bit of that edge, but you learn every day of how bad of a leader you are, no matter how good you think you are. But I wanted to leverage the skill I had, which is I know how to build a team. I know how to make people feel like we were swimming the same direction. And that was the only thing I had, because this business I bought is really technically complex. We make fiber optic gyroscopes for inertial navigation, which basically means we make witchcraft happen to make sure planes don't crash when they're in places without GPS. Wow. So I had no idea what any of that meant. In fact, I had to Google the word photonics of the company I bought. So
I just did that while you were talking. I was like, what's photonics?
Yeah.
Also, no risk at all, by the way. Like if a plane crashes, no big deal.
Low liability.
Our parts cannot fail. Very bad news if they do. So I knew I had no edge when it came to the technical or understanding how to make this, the new sweet fiber optic gyroscope of the world. However, my CTO and business partner, that was his job, right? And I knew that was his lane, was to make sure the technical happened. My job was to make sure the team was on board. They were comfortable that we were starting our own new thing. We were going to be our new company. All the employees came with us, which was great. But talk about starting that Ironman. I got to at least, hey, everybody, good to meet you. Also, we need to pick up all of our really hard technical equipment and move it to a new building in the next month and a half, stand it back up, get requalified to work on Uncle Sam's project, or else we don't make money and I can't pay any of you. I think I phrased it better than that. But
why did you have to move?
Because it was a carve out, we were sitting on borrowed land, right? The parent company didn't want to keep us under there. So they said, thanks for the deal, get out. Which we knew, like there was no mystery there, but it's still, when you're moving that technical of equipment and you're in a clean room, and you have all these qualification requirements from the government, finding the right building is already complex. Add to it, we're in Silicon Valley. Add to it that all the HVAC and stuff that has to be present for a clean room to function. None of that aligns, especially under that short of a timeline. So that's why we quickly ran out of cash. I mentioned at the beginning, we found the place. It was a pretty rough looking building and took a lot of work from our folks to just make it pretty again and make it function. But then even functioning wasn't enough, and it took 6 months for the government to come back in and say, yes, you really do have a facility producing good parts. Now you can produce and make parts, to say nothing of how long it takes to actually make those before you can sell them and collect the revenue. So there was a lot.
So the government would come and inspect your facility before you could even start manufacturing things for them. Is that how that works?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
And you can't start hitting go on the manufacturer until they say yes. And then for us, that can be a month or 2 months before a part is ready to go out the door. And all the time you're paying that electric bill, you're paying salaries, you're paying, we had equipment break, of course, during the move. So there was insurance claims. Nothing was going smoothly. And I wasn't there all the time. So I felt, this challenge of not actually being physically present in the business, because I can only fly out from Utah once a month or so because I can't afford to live in California as a new business owner. And so I couldn't always be there when things were getting rough. And so at times it was super frustrating that I wanted to be there. I wanted to be helpful. I wanted people to know that like they're not doing this alone. And I'm not just sitting out on my G5 drinking Mai Tais, having a great time. There was a lot of that strife of it sounds nice to be a remote CEO, but if you care at all and you want to be a part of the business and make it grow, it's mostly frustrating that you can't be there every day and help push the team in the right direction. So that was just some of the things that went wrong in the first 6 months, to say nothing of the next couple of years.
And for you, Caroline, it sounds like being remote was not a choice because of desired residence. It was more just a function of affordability. You just couldn't afford to live close to your business at the time.
Yeah, that's it. And I couldn't move the business much as I've tried over the past few years. The reality is this equipment is old. It's technically complex. That alone is hard to move. But more important is the talent. The team we have has been together, some of them for 10, 20 years. And you just can't replicate that level of skill and experience that you find in Silicon Valley in many other places in the U.S., or at least not quickly. And so it just wasn't feasible to uproot the company either.
Got it. Well, I'm looking forward to diving in a bit more to what that looked like from a financial perspective, and what the debt load looked like that you took on, because this is a fascinating story and a really complex business in general. By the way, when I Googled Photonics, I'm still not exactly sure. I couldn't explain to someone else what I just learned, but you've got to learn a very challenging technology. You've got to run a business that you've suddenly had to move. And then the financial burden is stacking up against you. So for those of you out there listening and thinking like, oh, this is going to be easy, keep listening. It gets better. Taylor, let's go to you. Tell us when it became real for you and what those first couple months looked like.
So after we closed our deal, I think a lot of people will go through this, but like if you buy a business from like a seller, not necessarily like Caroline's where it was a carve out, usually you'll have some sort of contract to keep the seller on as like a, short term, hey, coach me through the process of running this, because when you're going through diligence, it's not like you have a ton of time to just like sit next to them and watch them perform the job. It's like you're looking at the financials, you're going through in some cases an SBA process. I did not go through the SBA, which I can touch on a little bit later. I took out a different form of loan. But right after I stepped into the business, the seller and his primary manager both went on vacation for a week and a half, and similar situation. It's like a week and a half is not that long. Whatever, you're thrown into the fire. But I knew nothing about trailers, like absolutely nothing. Like I'm a spreadsheet warrior. Like my background is in finance. Like I can make financials look good on in Excel, but harder to do that in the physical world.
Did you know how to back a trailer? More importantly,
I did know how to back a trailer up.
Okay, you pretty much knew all you needed. That's the most technical knowledge there is.
That's all I needed. But I just remember like manning the phones, and like people would call in and they'd be like, "Hey, I'm looking for this part," and I'm like by the end of the week, I think I had probably 500 sticky notes just like all over. You always like, think about, oh, like if I go into a business, I'm going to run it like super smooth. Like it's not going to be like this chaotic nightmare that you see when you go into the seller's office. And it's like, that meme of like the threads all over the place, like that kind of situation. That was what it looked like, but with sticky notes, of just like, oh, I need to call this person back. This guy's looking for, some trailer part I've never heard of. This guy has like a trailer from 1987 that he's wanting to like replace a fender on. And do we even make that same fender anymore? So it was kind of a quick thrown into the fire. And then I remember just being on a bunch of calls with the seller when we were like reaching out to customers to like let them know, hey, the business has transitioned to new ownership. And that was like my first like indication of, because we had done some customer diligence, but that was like my first indication of like, problems beneath the surface. I remember like being on the phone with him, and he called up this one dealer, and he's like, hey, he's like, I sold the business. And like the guy just immediately like the dealer on the phone, he immediately just like launched into a tirade, like being like, hey, like you're the crappiest person in the world. Like this. And I'm like, what did I get myself into? I'm like, I thought this was like long-standing business, reputation solid, whatever the case may be. For some people that was the case. For others, that was not the case. And then on top of that, when I bought the business, we had pretty decent customer concentration with one particular dealer. And during diligence, before we closed on the business, the primary, because the family that owned the dealership, it was a husband, a wife, and their son that kind of ran the dealership. And the dad was kind of like, the person. And before we closed on the business, the dad dies. And so it's like, okay, well, what does that mean for like this, this customer on a go forward basis? Are they going to like continue to be a big customer? And we kind of just decided we would continue pushing through with the transaction. But that was a big point of uncertainty for us, of just, we bought this business, like, we're now kind of uncertain whether or not like we're going to have ongoing or at least the same level of revenue based on uncertainty around this customer. And so it was just a lot of situations like that. And then, the other big piece of it is with a lot of our processes, because like I bought a manufacturing business, and you'd think in a manufacturing business that's been around for 50 years that there's like, operations, processes, like documented knowledge. And there was, but like very little of it. I mean, the guy that was our primary drafter was like an 80-year-old part-time guy that came in, 4 hours a day, and 2 hours of that he was napping. So the big concern, or the thing that did end up happening is, and I can say this right now, is that like from the time I bought my business to now, I have one original employee left.
Wow. And how long, what's that time period for everyone?
2.5 years.
2.5 years, and one person left. Out of how many were there when you started?
20.
Okay.
We had 20 people.
Okay, so 5% of employees were retained. Over
5% of employees were retained. And there's plenty of learnings from that over like, in some cases I wish I would have turned some over faster.
Sure.
But also not fully understanding that as people leave without the systems and processes in place, like all that knowledge is just walking out the door. And and you have to basically like we just do things completely different today than we did when I first bought the company. In a lot of ways, it's much better, but it's a really painful, process when it's like you're having to like figure things. You're trying to learn the industry. You're trying to deal with like bad seller relationships, and you're trying to like fill in like missing like process holes of when I don't even have like the background to do that. I'm kind of just telling people, yeah, you weld the trailer, like I'll figure the rest out. So
Wow. I this is one of those things. I think this happens in church sometimes, where you're hearing a message and you're like, I know who needs to hear this. And I think a lot of us are feeling this, like people who have asked us for advice. It's like, I know a lot of people who need to hear this message, but it's so important. Those of you who are considering, listen to these words and these challenges that are coming through, because they're so real. That story about, the customer conversations you had before closing, that due diligence, you just have to expect they're going to put you in touch with the three guys they play golf with that are their buddies. And it's like, hey guys, I'll tell you what, you say something nice about me, and next round I'm paying green fees, right? Like, every business is going to have frustrated customers. There's not a perfect business out there. If you're looking for the perfect business, you're never going to close on a business. You've got to expect that. But also, listening to these stories is really helpful to understand the types of frustration and experiences you are likely to experience when you buy a business. Let's jump over to Andrew, then we'll close with Blake.
Wow, where to begin? And just to establish that, this isn't a one-off pattern. Like, you will experience some sort of gut punch, we'll call it, within the first 30 days. And so I had it with both my acquisitions. I'm assuming Blake went through his, and we've now heard Caroline and Taylor go through theirs, and it happened with both mine. So just so we're clear to everyone listening, it will happen. It's not a matter of if, it will. For the first commercial cleaning business, I also dealt with some pretty lopsided customer concentration. So Vail Ski Resorts was the largest customer, and when I purchased the business, they represented 90% of the revenue. And so they were my master. I could not lose that contract. And the seller, because he didn't track finances very well, and he was a little bit, not a little bit, he was dishonest about how he was billing. He said, this is how I bill, blah, blah, blah. And because I was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and naive going into all this, I didn't really factor in much operating capital up front. And luckily, my SBA lender was looking out for me, and she was like, hey, we should add some, more into the loan, so you have some operating capital to start the business. And the way that the seller ran the business is he paid the employees on a weekly basis, and Vail paid on a 30-day net 30 after you invoice. So he was invoicing weekly to make sure those checks were coming in weekly. But since I am now a new entity, that whole cycle started 30 days, but I still have to pay my employees every single week. And I closed December 3rd. So Vail is going into prime time ski season, and we're at max staff capacity. Like, payroll was I think like 20 to 22,000 a week. And this is, entry level labor. And I quickly ran out of the 50K that the SBA loan got me. And so I had to, fortunately, my father owns a pool construction business, and I was able to go to him and beg for money. And I was like, yeah, Pops, I need 40K. That's a big ask. And I'm blessed to have a very understanding father. And he was just like, you now know how I feel running a small business, and so he wrote me the check, and I was able to keep things afloat. And then where the invoicing bit me was, we got about halfway into February, and so we're 2.5 months in, And the team that I work with at Vail comes to me and says, "Hey, what's going on? We're 53% over budget." And I was just like, "What?" Like, yeah, you're $25,000 over what the budget was tracking for, and you need to pay us back. And I was just like, why? Well, A, I don't have that. I've paid all the labor, I've paid my expenses, I've paid my SBA loan payments, and so we negotiated because I argued, and this is partially your guys' fault too for catching it 2.5 months after the fact. And so it went from 25 and change down to 20. And then I parsed that out over the next 20 weeks of invoices at 2K at a time. So that, massively ate into the very small margin that I had, which I learned after the fact margins weren't fantastic, and which stoked a whole new renegotiating of how things were invoiced, contracts, billing, all that good stuff. And when you're going in as little me against this publicly traded company, and from a negotiation standpoint, and I can't lose this contract, it was a very stressful conversation to have, because it was an at will contract. Like if they didn't like me, or they're just like, we don't want to deal with this, you're done, you're out. And then with the second acquisition, similar to like what Caroline went through with the move out, the carpet cleaning business was operated out of the home of the seller. And
Wait, can
she
I stop
gave,
you for a second, Andrew? Because the timeline here is really interesting. You're
yeah,
going through this like gut punch, fetal position moment where you're asking your dad for $40,000.
yeah.
When did you go acquire the second business?
So that was 18 months later.
Okay, so 18 months after you'd gone through this moment with Vail, you went
Yeah.
out and bought another one.
I'm a gluttony for punishment. What
This
can
is
I say?
amazing. All right, tell us more.
And so the carpet cleaning business run out of the home of the seller, and who lived in Park City, and she gave me 2 weeks to find somewhere else. And if you guys are familiar with the real estate situation in Park City, it is not friendly to small service businesses. It's either office or retail. And what is available from like that would be amenable to the services industry is like way out on the outskirts, or you got to go to Heber, which was very very inconvenient. And so at the 2 week mark, I found a really small office that I could just operate the business out of, that was like 200 square feet. And then
A
I found
closet.
a closet, yeah. And then I found a storage unit, and picked a Saturday. Of course, it was the day that everyone in my life had something planned. And I had one friend who raised his hand and said, "I'll help you move all this
Ah,
stuff." And
bless
so
his
on a
soul.
Saturday, oh, yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Jace. Thank you, Jace. That was the day that I had my first panic attack, just
Wow.
because the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And I was freaking out because I had never experienced or felt that in my life. Because this business was very different from the commercial cleaning business, where the commercial cleaning business is pretty steady, has a cadence. Everyone knows the jobs that need to be done. Carpet cleaning business was much more direct to consumer, and so we're fielding, you know lots of like the good problem I had was the phone didn't stop ringing. So I would answer the call, I'd be on the call, another call would come through, leave a voicemail, I would hang up, go to call that other one back, and then another call would come in. So good problem to have, stressful when you're trying to, balance everything else. And also in that process, I figured out why the carpet cleaners were selling their business, and it was because the brother and sister were going through the equivalent of a divorce.
Hmm.
They had done everything together throughout their lives. Neither one were married. Um, Ironically, I thought they were married when I first met them, which led to a very awkward conversation. Um, and there was a lot of bad juju going into that deal. And again, 2020 hindsight, had I probably not, bulldozed my way through closing a deal and done a little bit more diligence, maybe would have not done that deal.
Got it. Thanks for being honest with us. And that's a really tough thing to admit, right? Like once you do a deal, then, I think it was Caroline who mentioned like, hey, we're going to make this deal work regardless of what happens. And to look back and say, you know what, that probably wasn't the best thing for me and my business at this time. And you mentioned the panic attack, Andrew. I'm very tempted to jump right in there right now, but that's where we're going to close things out, is to talk about the physical, mental, and emotional toll that this route takes on many. I, in my life of 46 years, have never had any type of issue with mental health. But in the last 16 months, I've dealt with more challenges myself than I ever had in the prior 45 years combined. It's a tough road, not just financially, but personally and emotionally. So we're going to get into that and close with that. But before we do, Blake, talk to us about your journey. Tell us about what things look like during those first several months for you.
Yeah, so we closed on Appleton Electronics Group. Like I mentioned, is basically 1.5 person business. In reality, it's a 1 person business and a bookkeeper. Again, numbers look phenomenal on paper. I was like, man, 1 person business doing over 400K of EBITDA, like sounds great. Long same customer base. And I'll never forget, we met to transition the business. We met in Park City. He was up in Park City at the time. And I think one of the things that is so easy to overlook, I mean, I'm a sales guy, a VP of sales, built sales teams, ran sales teams for 15 years. I thought, like, this is just a sales motion. This is coming in. I could just sell more. Like, this is great. We're going to crush this. And, Tom, the seller, walks in. I love Tom. Great guy. Like, respect the hell out of him. He walks in, he's got his Manila folder. We walk into the kiln and he slams it on the table and he's like, there you go. There's all your purchase orders and customers. And that was the first like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I guess that makes sense, And then I started digging through these and I realized like, it's literally physical, just copies of every purchase order and every customer. And I was like, okay, this would be interesting. Like we start talking. Of course, Tom's just like, he's just going. He's stoked. I mean, he just put $1 million of cash in his pocket. He's 65 years old. He's ready to travel the world. And as we talk, we're supposed to spend the whole day, right? We're spend the next like 3 days together in kiln. Like we're working through everything. He talks for about an hour. And of course, he's jazzed up. He's talking through every customer and how awesome they are and how long he's sold to them the same parts for 7 years now. And they just send purchase orders. And like, as we're sitting there, he, like one purchase order comes in for like $2,000 and you're like, there you go, Blake. There's Sam. That's another purchase order. It's going to be awesome. I'm like, this is great. Like, I don't like know what to feel here, but we just got a purchase order and I just took over today. So, and to be clear, like,
wait, how did it come in? Did it come through like
just email?
A text?
They just send
email. Okay.
Just send emails. Like, luckily he did used email.
Yeah.
But that's just how customers send a purchase order. It's just like,
I was imagining a courier walking in the room and being like,
here's your physical. No, it is almost that bad. But Caroline, I'm sure, can empathize being in this industry. Is very, very antiquated. So yeah, we get a purchase order that same day and I was a couple $1,000. Like, oh, okay, maybe this will be all right. And, on our side, like my wife and I personally, we drained our bank accounts. Like we literally put everything we had into this. And I'll never forget, we had $10,000 of cash left. Like that was our living. And we just thought like, this is it. We're going all in. And we bought our vending route. We paid cash for that. This we'd financed, had debt service on it, but like we knew that like this is the bet we were going to make. And by about 2 p.m. that day, Tom was done. He was like over transitioning and was like not interested in talking much more. And, in my contract, like I think Taylor mentioned this, we had a transition, but it was really like, you're going to help out for 6 months at least. But it's a 1 person business. Like who's going to hold him accountable to that? Like there is really no, and what am I going to do? Fight him legally? So he kind of was like 2 o'clock rolls around. He's like, all right, like I think you're off to a good start. Like we could sync up tomorrow for a few hours, but I think it'd be good. And I'm thinking to myself, this thing is run for 40 years. And like in a few hours of him just talking at me and saying words I know nothing about, I kind of Caroline's description of what she even does. I'm like, I have no idea what you even said to me, let alone like what I'm supposed to do. Well, the second day we show back up, I'm already overwhelmed trying to like process my first purchase order. And we're going to transition QuickBooks. Well, I immediately find out he brings a physical computer to Kiln, like not a computer, like a desktop, because he's transitioning QuickBooks. And I was like, oh man, this is like QuickBooks. This is not QuickBooks Online. This is a QuickBooks. What do you even call it? It's on his computer.
Yeah, he downloaded this.
Desktop. Thank you. The desktop version. And if anyone, if you've ever transitioned, well, number one, they aren't the same product, not even close. So no. Desktop is not online, and they don't communicate. And you actually can't. It's very difficult to transition from desktop to online. And all I knew was online. So I was like thinking, how, like, do I just buy this computer off him? Like, what do I do? And I didn't even know QuickBooks. I had never like used QuickBooks before. I've been at SaaS companies, like we use QuickBooks for other stuff, but like, anyway, it was a whole different world to me. And we spent a few hours realizing, and of course, then Tom's 65 years old. He also doesn't understand what I'm trying to communicate, which is like, Tom, this is QuickBooks Desktop. I'm using online. How do I get this online? He's like, I have no idea. And he couldn't, like, no CRM. The CRM was his email and communication. So then we had to figure out how to transfer email data into my email. Do I just take over his email? But he wouldn't want to like give me full access because he used a lot of personal stuff. So
this is his personal email he's using.
Yes, right. Now, not a personal. He had a business email, but a lot of personal stuff tied into it. So we had to like start to filter through. So you can start to realize where this was going very quick. Of like, I spent 3 months almost every single day just on the phone with QuickBooks, on the phone with parent networks, these like really also old like domain hosting companies that are not good products either, frankly, trying to communicate this and like help them understand what's going on here, getting his approval. And then very similar to Taylor's experience, Tom calls me about 2 weeks into this and was like, hey, just so you know, we're going to go travel the world. Like, I'm going to be gone for at least a month and a half. And I'm like, okay. And he's basically in a very kind way saying, I'm not reachable, but maybe once in a while we can have a call. And at that point, like the business was fully transitioned, whatever that meant. At the same time, I'm like trying to keep our vending business going. I have a consulting business that is actually paying the bills because I didn't expect to pay the bills from these other things. And we get about 3 months into this and like, it's okay. We're still getting some purchase orders. But then our largest customer, I call her, I think about January time, and turns out she quit and is no longer, and these are very large companies, so large manufacturing companies. So now my one contact there is gone. And I'm starting to panic because I'm not exactly sure who else to be going to. And when you're selling to 10,000, 20,000 person companies, it's not easy to know who transitions ownership of your account. And they're not very good about communicating that, let alone the fact, and Caroline probably deals with this on a regular basis, they all have separate like portals you have to log into that Tom, the previous owner, didn't like fully understand and couldn't like help me get there. So my buyers are trying to communicate with me, but I had no idea I had to log into a portal. They're sending purchase orders through portals, but I'm not getting them. And I'm having to like go to the portals to try and figure out. And so it was a hot mess. And basically our top 10 customers, my buyers quit or retired, 4 or 5 of them in the first 3 months of that next year. And I immediately started to think like, oh man, this is not good. Like, I don't know what is going to happen here, but I'm like starting from zero essentially at all these customers of trying to figure out who should be sending me purchase orders. And these aren't repeat buys. These are often like last time buys, they quit manufacturing. Texas Instruments quit manufacturing the product. They have to call us, and we can buy excess supply from other suppliers. And so it's not just repeat orders, just sending purchase orders for parts. It's just in time parts. And so if they don't know I exist, they're not going to call me. And I start frantically trying to figure out how to go to market here. And I thought, okay, well, I'm a sales guy, but selling hardware is not the same as selling software. It's a very different motion. And I, in my ignorance, thought it would just translate. It's the same. It's easy enough, and I'll just figure it out. And that year was brutal. That was my mental health crisis year of realizing we're going to lose our biggest account, let alone our top 5 accounts now have all new buyers at them, and I have no idea who they are. And I also know nothing about this industry and who to start with. And I also don't know anybody in this industry. I can't call the old owner because he's been pretty unhelpful, and we don't even really speak the same languages. And I'm starting from zero in every aspect. So I think like the biggest thing for me was realizing, probably taking for granted, spending 15 years in software, how much I actually know about software and how little I know about every other business. And business is not just business and a P&L. It's like the intricate details of how to run a cleaning business. I'm not even going to pretend what that takes. And the detail, even vending. I mean, vending is like probably I have a bigger beef with vending because everyone's out there like, yeah, just go throw money and it's passive income. I'm like, yeah, but what happens when you have to fix a credit card reader? That's freaking hard. And you know how long it's taken me to fix a credit card reader on a vending machine? That's a whole nother story. We won't even talk about the vending business, but that one's going all right.
So here's what occurs to me as I sit here and look at this panel. I look at Blake, a super successful SaaS sales executive. I look at Caroline, a Wharton MBA. I look at Andrew, a private equity executive. I look at Taylor Nielsen, Goldman Sachs, right? Like, these are 4 super smart, very talented, very capable, highly employable professionals who all 4 have shared being out of money, having major mental and emotional struggles, and going through some of the hardest moments of their careers. So if you're listening right now and thinking, this is an easy path, this is so much better than having a W-2 income because it's going to be passive, I'll make all this money and it will be easy, you're barking up the wrong tree. But it can be highly rewarding, highly fulfilling, and very much worth it. But know that it's hard, even for highly accomplished individuals. Now, our time is a little bit more limited than I'd hoped. I would love to have another hour to go through this. We've probably got about 20 minutes here. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here and ask you to go through and talk a little bit about what the J curves look like, right? We hear and talk about this J curve. So talk a little bit about financially what this looked like. First, you can talk about what you expected. Like, hey, I thought it was going to be a rocket ship. I was going to bring all this professionalization, take things off the, off the carbon copy and out of the dark ages of how they were running things, and no more Post-it notes or strings going around. And I was going to professionalize this thing. We were going to grow like crazy. That's not the reality. We all know there's a J curve. Tell us what that looked like. Tell us what cash looked like. Help us understand what debt covenants look like for you, and take us through a little bit of what that felt like. And then we'll close with how it's felt for you emotionally, but more importantly, how you got through and where you are now. So first, let's start with what the J curve looked like. And Andrew, let's jump to you if that's all right.
Sure. So J curve for me was pretty slow on the commercial cleaning side of things, just not understanding what the sales cycle revolves around, getting meaningful commercial cleaning contracts. Like, most of these companies are using property managers, so that means courting them, and you're really just waiting for somebody to get fed up with their current provider. And it was actually quite astonishing how much people are willing to put up with really crappy service, just because the pain of changing vendors is so high. And so I learned that pretty quickly, that I'm not just going to add all these contracts by me pounding pavement. And so it was more like I got to just optimize, renegotiate contracts. And so the first 6 months, I was pretty much running the bank account to zero every month until I was able to renegotiate that Vail contract. And then things started to look up from there. On the carpet cleaning side, uh, as stressful as it was, the J curve actually was pretty quick within the first month. So, I was handed, similar to Blake, a spiral bound notebook with the written schedule of the day in it. And then they would photocopy it and hand it to the employees of what they were doing. So there was no technology behind this. So just implementing a CRM, a scheduling and dispatch software. Adding some bodies, was able to increase revenue 100% within 30 days just by sending 2 or sometimes 3 teams out on a day and filling it out, versus just booking, customers into the future, because there was no way to track and optimize where those jobs were scheduled. And so things were looking great. And that's when I was like, holy crap, I did it. I solved the ETA equation of moving from pencil and paper to technology. And we're just, cash is just oozing out of all the nooks and crannies. I was so stoked. Hired a general. I had a manager. He wasn't super fantastic. So I was like, I got to find someone else, and ended up hiring a friend to GM the whole thing. Well, I still focus on the
Does
family
Jace come
office.
back into the picture now, or not Jace?
I offered Jace the job, but he was like, no, I can't do it. So I probably would be in a different scenario if he was the one that I brought on, because he's a stud. No, hired another friend, and knowing that the position was probably a little bit of a stretch for him, but I'm all about giving people opportunities, because people have taken chances and given me shots. And so I was like, I'll mentor him, I'll coach him through it. Shortly thereafter, he was diagnosed with melanoma, and he also had his first child on the way, and things weren't going well. And so I was placed with one of the biggest rock and a hard place circumstances that you could be placed in. People like to say, well, it's just business. You're dealing with the human element here. And so I was like, you know what? I don't want to have that on my conscience for the rest of my life, that I let go a friend who was just going into this hardship in his life. And so I kept him on, thought I could coach him out of it. And that was not the case. And about a year later, he had just wrapped up his treatments. Things were starting to look better for him from a health perspective. The business suffered dramatically. One of the employees in the carpet cleaning company, who was an 18-year standing employee, he was not happy that I purchased it. Snot-nosed kid, and he was maybe 15 years older than me. And so he was moonlighting and using our trucks and equipment to clean carpets and do all the other services we did. And we caught him twice. We're like, you're done. He went and took all of our commercial accounts because he had the relationships. So most of the accounts up in Park City were property managers, because there's not a lot of permanent residents up there. And so, Deer Valley, the big hotels, he took it all for himself. And so that was a huge revenue hit. And then I'll never forget this day. It was Labor Day 2024. I was out. We had just completely scraped all of our landscaping, and we were redoing our backyard. I was forming up the forms for my man shed that was going to be my sweet home office. And I got a call from Zach, and he's like, hey, did you see the email from Vail? And I said, nope, just tell me. I don't want to go look at it. And he said, they've exercise their right to hold the contract. So we have 30 days left. And so at that time, they were representing 65% of revenue. We'd whittled it down. And so that's really when I went into full-blown panic mode. I ran inside, took a shower, and was like speeding. And I live in Saratoga Springs, so not as bad as Taylor going from Midway to Logan, but it's still a little bit of a jaunt for me to get up to Park City. Trying to get the girls that I work with on the phone, and they just had a laundry list of complaints that I just had no awareness of at all. And I thought I'd pulled it out, and I had a couple sit downs with them. I was just like, hey, listen, I'll be up here every day, whatever you need. And they ultimately decided to go with another company. And so we went from doing, anywhere from 225, 250K a month down to 10 in a very, very short period of time. So my J curve was like that. And I had an SBA loan and a seller's note. That represented about 15 grand a month worth of debt. So luckily I deferred the SBA loan. That gave me a runway of about 6 to 8 months. The sellers from the carpet cleaning company, however, were not willing to play ball. And they're just like, we need our payment. So this was November, December, entered some very, very dark times. So it was 2024. And again, I'm a transparent human being. The suicidal thoughts were a very real moment for me. I have 3 little kids. My wife has been lock and step with me through every part of this journey. And if it weren't for her and a couple other close friends, I wouldn't be here to be sharing this with everybody today. And we ended up filing bankruptcy, which was a whole crazy process in and of itself. Oddly cathartic the moment. It was almost Christmas, and me and my wife kind of looked at each other and were like, I think we got to file bankruptcy. And then when we both kind of gave each other the nod, it was like, all right. A little bit of sense of relief. Didn't last very long because there was still a lot of stress in the pipeline. But that closed January 1 of this year. And so that has all been resolved. And currently, I kind of made the transition backwards from Blake. I went from the services industry. Now I'm back into tech and doing a startup and in the cybersecurity space. And so, yeah, that's in a nutshell. Sorry, I probably went on a really long-winded rant there, but yeah.
Andrew, wow. Thank you for being so transparent with us and open. And this is exactly, I think, what listeners need to hear. They need to hear this story and understand from your perspective what you went through, how you went through it, and then gauge for themselves if this is the path that they want to take. Let me just stick with you, and we'll wrap up with you. I think we'll do this with everyone because it's impossible for me to ignore this moment and move on to someone else before we really explore the physical, personal, emotional, and mental toll that this took on you. Talk to us a little bit more about that and how you got through to where you are today, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, first off, I had to have some really, really tough conversations with a handful of people and realize that I'm not the only one that this has happened to. So many people have either very flirted with the line of bankruptcy and failure, or they've gone through it. But I mean, it's kind of a taboo topic. No one likes to say I had to file bankruptcy. And so that took a while for me to come to the realization of that I'm not the only one. I'm not on an island. And I think that's what was kind of the cause of those dark thoughts, is that no one knew what I was experiencing. And that's not the case. Lots of people out there to talk to, and who will talk to you in a more private setting. And then the second was that my worth is not bound to what I do for my profession or the dollars that I bring in the door. My worth comes from being a present father and a present husband and a good human being to everybody that I um, interact with on a day-to-day basis. And as I have focused on those things, I've had this really big paradigm shift where like I'm totally fine being at zero. Like it's a really weird paradigm shift that I've had where like the last decade I've just been focused on how do I maximize cash flows? How do I get on a private jet again? How do I keep up with all the trips that my friends are taking and the watches? And uh, I don't care about that anymore. What matters is like I got to spend the last year hanging out with my kids a lot, and that's been, priceless for me, really. And I've seen the relationships that I've had with others change. My stress levels, my anxiety levels are at, I won't say zero, but they're low just because I've now been to that bottom and it's not that bad. It's really not that bad. Um, it's just money. Money comes and goes. And, I learned way more from going through this than if I would have just been playing it safe and doing the W-2 and not doing hard things.
Andrew, you're an inspiration, my friend. Thank you for your words, for sharing your journey, for being so open. Those two lessons are what's sticking with me. It's that do hard things because that's when we learn the most. What you've learned and the way that you've progressed as a human because of that is inspirational to me and hopefully to all who are listening. And then two is this idea of, success, if we're not careful, can be defined by other people. But it's nobody
Yeah.
else's job to define our success but our own. Success is this beautiful thing that there are over 7 billion different definitions of success because each one of us gets to define our own. And the way you've defined it for yourself is beautiful. It's about being a father, about being present as a husband and being there for your children, and about building and learning and growing. And that, bankruptcy for what it is, you call it failure. No matter what you're doing, I've failed so many times in work, and I think that in my professional career would have filed bankruptcy many times because of all the mistakes I made and the failures that I had. It's just that I wasn't running the business, and so I had a safety net to catch me. And I think that's one of the things to be aware of in this world of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship through acquisition is that a failure can mean bankruptcy. It doesn't mean life is a failure, but it may mean that business was. And all of us have experienced that at some level in our careers, and it just looks different for different people. So this is inspirational. I appreciate you sharing all that. I didn't expect to get emotional during this conversation, but I have and really appreciate you. Taylor, tough act to follow, but why don't you take us through your J curve and then talk to us a little bit about what that's meant to you emotionally and mentally.
I'll defer.
Pass.
Yeah, you can't follow Andrew. He's a hard act. No, before we jump into that, I would say, just from the stories that I've heard, I think somebody needs to do post-acquisition transition services, because all of us have experienced the same process of hey, here's my desktop QuickBooks version that I'm too cheap to pay $300 a year for. So I bought this in 1987. Good luck, because we went through the same process. No, from a J curve perspective, technically I'm still in the J curve. And I planned on being in the J curve to be clear. And I think everybody that buys something should plan on a J curve. It ended up being a lot steeper for me for similar reasons that, Blake described of we had, I remember modeling out what I thought the business was going to look like post close, and I purposefully, I'm somewhat of a conservative person. Have always been hesitant to take a ton of risk, and so I like to hedge quite often. And so when I was modeling out what I thought the business was going to look like, I purposely like baked in, like, I'm like, we're not going to like really, get back to the numbers that the business was at for, maybe a year or two. But same thing, like I thought, it's just selling more product through to customers. And a lot of what I've experienced was like a lack of industry expertise or understanding of how things worked. Because when I went through and looked at the business from a diligence perspective, the thing that I noticed is that one, looking at a publicly traded company and looking at a private small business is nowhere near the same thing. I was used to like, looking at a business's 10Qs and 10Ks to like mine data, and like the going concern value for businesses that are of that size is usually like, yeah, like they're not going to just like disappear overnight, but like most small businesses, like they literally can just disappear like overnight. And the thing that was hard for me to understand was that when I looked at the business from a historical basis, I was just looking at sales from the company to the dealers. But ultimately, in order for the dealers to purchase more product, dealers have to sell trailers to end customers. And what I was seeing was essentially like channel stuffing, if you will, if people are familiar with that nomenclature, but like of sales that were happening to dealers, but not sales that were happening to end customers. And so ultimately, it was just like a problem brewing that I just couldn't see. And so after we closed, I remember going through that same exact transition of like the short-term cash squeeze that I think a lot of people, go through, where you don't pay enough attention to working capital of like, yes, you still have to pay people and you got to make sure you have money in the account. And we definitely made sure we had money in the account, but my business is kind of like project-based in a way where it's not recurring. It's reoccurring purchases where it's like, yes, dealers will order trailers from you year after year, but it's not necessarily a pre-contracted, yes, I'm going to order 500K from you next year as well. And all you have to do is just worry about that. And so I remember like for the first, month, just like waiting for like, for us to ship out a trailer so that like I could see cash start coming in the door. And ultimately like it did, but we ran into like vendor issues early on where like one of our vendors, like when you transition a business, even though the business has been doing business with other vendors for, 50 plus years, you're a new entity. And so like you have to establish new accounts with all these different people. And I remember like one of our main vendor was basically like, hey, like we're putting a cap on like what we're willing to sell to you at X. And I'm like we were literally just last month we were doing, like before I bought the business, we were doing like, $300,000 a month in purchases from you. And now you're like saying like, I have to pay that balance down before my bill is due just because to stay below a certain threshold. And that was pretty frustrating. So that we ran into issues early on there. We lost 2 meaningful clients due to poor relationship with the seller, where once again it was just stuff bubbling under the surface that we didn't know was a thing. Had a bid that we thought we were going to be able to win come up for RFP. They just completely ghosted me during the process, and that was like a $1.2 million contract. And I was like, well, there's that. Had another dealer that was, doing about $800,000 a year with us, basically go to like zero pretty quickly. So pretty quickly we lost like, call it $3.5 million in like what I had assumed wasn't necessarily like guaranteed, but I also didn't assume it was going to go to zero. Like you can always model in like like I'm not going to be as good as the old guy, so maybe revenues will decline like 20%, which is kind of what I'd modeled in for that, and it was like way more than that. And so probably about a little over a year into it, or I guess it was actually a little less than a year. We were about 10 months into it when we tripped a technical covenant on our debt. So we weren't in danger of like tripping we were making our payment still, but like one of the things that's different about the loan that I took out versus what a lot of ETA people are familiar with, which is the SBA 7A program, is like SBA loans, they don't have covenants. Like the government's just like, just give us our money and we won't bug you about how it comes in or whatever, but we do want to get paid. If you do a different type of loan, typically those come with covenants where it's like, hey, you can make the payment every single month, but if your debt to EBITDA ratio goes below a certain threshold, you're in technical default, and they can call the loan, whenever they want. And so we ran into that issue, like I said, about 10 months into the acquisition. We were still making the payments, still trying to fight to go out and recapture market share. But like one of the tough things about the business that I bought, which I think Caroline mentioned, when it comes to like manufacturing, is like when I looked at it, like the business didn't look CapEx heavy. And it's not like it still is CapEx heavy, but like the business had been underinvested in for a long time, which if you're not very familiar with some of those things, like you don't really notice that. It's like, yeah, it's like I'm inheriting like these machines and this saw and these welders and, all this other stuff. But it's like, if that stuff isn't properly maintained, or if you're wanting to like grow, introduce new things into the business, like all of that has a very real cost. And so the example that I always give is we got into a situation where if I'm in the boat with my lender, like we find a hole in the boat. The situation that I ran into is my lender essentially like fired 2 more shots into the hole and was like, maybe he'll row faster. And that hasn't worked out super well. Cause like, we got into like, about, I don't know, 16 months in. So a little over a year. The lender's like, hey, by the way, like we're not calling the loan, but just so you know, we're going to start charging you default interest. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that look like? And they're like, oh, nothing. It's just like an extra $15,000 a month. And I'm like, oh yeah, nothing. Don't worry about it. Like that's just my rent payment for the building. Like not a big deal. And so that kind of carried on for almost another year where it was just like, we were making this debt. We were basically just like bleeding the company dry. And like, the funny thing is like when I throw out the numbers, people are like, it's like, how can you be losing money when you're like doing like $6+ million in sales a year? And it's like in manufacturing, it's pretty easy. People, I mean, Blake can attest. It's like, not every business has software margins. Like this isn't like, a 70% gross margin business. And then I'm just like, flushing cash out the other side. Like manufacturing businesses have real costs to run. And a lot of it goes into the purchase of the material and, paying the people to produce the product. And the biggest thing is you end up, you have to get to a certain revenue level regardless in order to just cover like a basic fixed cost level for a business like this. And we were facing a double hard situation where it was like, we needed to grow to basically get out of the, even if we were paying, like able to make the payments on the debt, we were kind of forced into this like weird scenario where it's not like you can just say, okay, like as long as we can hold steady here, we'll be fine. But we have to like grow, 30% a year just to stay in compliance with a debt covenant, which, when you're already underwater and you're facing a bunch of, issues running a small business, like that's no simple feat. I mean, it's hard to grow like a good business 30% a year without, having a bunch of these other anchors like tying you down. And so that's something that we're still working through and going through. Thankfully for me, and I remember having this conversation with you, Kyle. This was probably like a couple of months ago. I remember you just like we were on the phone and you were like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, yeah, like I mean, and I seriously mean that, because it's like one of the things that I am grateful for is like the loan that I took out. I do not have a personal guarantee on, and so my sleep at night factor has not. I have no idea what Andrew's been through. It's like, it's a completely different setup when you're putting everything on the line. Like my ego will if everything falls apart for me, my ego will definitely take a hit for sure, of like, oh, like, I thought I was successful, I thought I could do this, but like ultimately I couldn't. But like I haven't had like that straight jacket moment. I've definitely had plenty of like nights where I couldn't sleep because like my brain wouldn't turn off, and I'm like doing the mental math in my head of like, oh, okay, like I need to be able to get, this much in revenue. And I've had so many of those months. I remember like telling my business partner at one point, I'm like, we crossed a very important threshold. And he's like, what's that? I'm like, I have more money in my personal checking account than the business checking account. Like, and like I've probably had a half dozen moments where it was like mid-month, I knew we needed X amount of dollars to be able to like make payroll or do whatever, and like clockwork, like somehow you kind of figure it out. And it's like last minute, like getting a deposit in clears the day before payroll's supposed to clear and leaves you with like, a little bit extra. It's like, those are the things that like you can tell people about, but you can't really like prepare anybody for that type of an experience until you've actually gone through it and realized it's just like, for a lot of small business owners, that's not abnormal, to like do the the mental math of figuring out how you're going to make payroll, and delaying paying yourself, or just completely deferring paying yourself. Because I went through like a 9-month period where I just like didn't take any money out of the business just to try and like keep it sustained. And like luckily I was in a position to be able to like do that. But that's not a common, I mean, for a lot of people, it's like, that's like game over. It's like the business is their livelihood. And so it's more to your point, it's more just having a general awareness that these things are, common, that to Andrew's point, you're not alone in facing them, but also just ideally come into this with your eyes wide open of, things can and will go wrong. One of my favorite memes is we did this not because it's easy, but because we thought it would be. Sometimes you almost need that irrational, the irrational, like, oh yeah, I'm going to take this and go from like 0 to 10 million. You need that to like go into this, because otherwise, like rationally, I don't think a lot of people would like make the rational decision to like go buy a small business. Like on paper, it makes 0 sense. Like I can tell you that much. But there are some definite like upsides to it. But you kind of have to have a little bit of a rational belief and, think that it's going to turn out different for you.
I love it, Taylor. And what, a really important distinguishing factor that you shared for everyone to consider is the difference between a personal guarantee and not having a personal guarantee, and something for you to consider, everyone who's thinking about this. What amount of personal financial risk am I willing to take on? And even if there's not that same level of personal financial risk, there is a very heavy emotional toll that comes with any of these routes. As we need to move on, and all of you have stories that we could talk about for hours. But Blake, let's go to you, and then we'll close with Caroline, if that's all right. Same question.
Man, your guys' story of knots in my stomach, so we'll see how I can get through mine at this point. I can empathize with both in a huge way. So the year we closed in Appleton, it did 1.1 million, and we closed in October. So I had kind of my 3 months of really just trying to figure out how to get into QuickBooks, and then came into January before my first buyer at our biggest customer quit, or I should say retired. And the kind of subsequent 4 months after that was our same thing, retired, buyers retired, 4 months in a row. And we came in like March of that year, it was the first full year, and was feeling it. I mean, the bank account was negative at that point. Had to go get a line of credit. Luckily figured out how to get a line of credit, just to like, and you know, it was so small. Luckily, like CapEx was so minimal, but we're talking like even just enough to buy parts. Like we were in a brokering all these parts. So I'm cash out of pocket, and also come to find out that I didn't understand it even to know in due diligence is when you're selling to some of the largest manufacturers in the world, you're a small fish, and they have very favorable terms that could be net 90 very often. And they will wait until the last day to pay the bill. And there's kind of nothing you could do about it, or at least I don't know. And if anyone's got, I would love to know how to get paid sooner, but, you know, we were waiting on payment from invoices from December to even try to get things moving, and let alone like try and reinvest in the business to grow it and spend the time to grow it. And I saw the writing on the wall and realized like I have to pay this debt service of $12,000 every single month regardless, and had to ramp up my other business, my consulting business, because it was actually just paying our bills and something we could live off of, and hadn't taken a single penny out of Appleton because it had to grow the bank account enough, which by the way, I came in with $25,000 of working capital in that business. And in reality, I probably needed $150,000 just to even like keep the wheels on the bus, let alone go through all this. And that whole year was absolutely brutal. We ended that year at 232,000, down from over 1.1 million the year before, and churned a lot of the big customers, and have like kind of struggled to like figure out how to get back into those accounts and those buyers. We lost, I think it was $50,000 that first, so negative 50 grand. And honestly, it was a dark place. I fortunately have an amazing spouse. She's been so supportive, and we, you know, had very similar moments to Andrew of like March, April that time, realized we just had to look at each other, and I said like, if we had to sell everything and live in a trailer, like we could, and we'd be all right, and we'd figure it out. We got 4 young kids, all in club sports too. So it's like, if we had to just write all this off, we can, and like, we'll figure it out. We can still be happy. I'll never forget, I went on vacation. We go to San Diego one time a year. And I think it was June of that year. And it was like kind of right in the middle of all this. The bank account was negative at this point for the business, and just trying to like funnel in a couple $1,000s here and there, let alone buy parts when I needed to. And I was literally stealing from like my other business capital on a monthly basis to just funnel money into this business. And my books, gosh, were such a mess at the end of the year to clean up. But I had no other option. And we went on vacation, and my family was sitting by the pool and like having a good time. And I had my fetal position moment. It was like, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't focus. I couldn't be present. And it was the first time my therapist, you know, we were talking through it while I was there, and he's like, you know, look, like you've basically masked everything you've been going through because you could distract yourself by working 14-hour days, and then you just sleep, and then work 14-hour days, sleep, working 14-hour days, sleep. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to be on vacation here, and your body's like, oh, wow, like I'm supposed to relax, and all those emotions came to the surface, and it was the weirdest, worst vacation I've ever had. It's not a vacation at all. Spent a lot of time just crying, and bless my wife's heart, like just so supportive. Geez. And I think I just realized, like, dude, that was one of those moments coming back and meeting with the therapist, like, if I had to lose it all, it's like, we're good. Like, what's the worst case scenario? We did a lot of fear setting exercises of, then what? Like, am I dead? To Andrew, I can empathize, man. A lot of thoughts go through your head of like, gosh, this could all just be gone. And I could, if I was gone, like, what would happen? And, it's a dark place. And, spent the rest of that year truly working through that. And, we came into January the following years, did the second full year. And we were on the very, I would say, the other side of the J curve of what I thought, at least on the upside, is like, we're getting some better purchase orders. Things were coming in. It wasn't bleeding money on a monthly basis. And last year we had a decent year. It at least paid for itself. The business net over $100,000. But unfortunately, middle of last year, the tariffs have an enormous impact on what we do, and we're now feeling the effects of that. And so I think we're in the second version of a J curve, and we'll see how this year goes. But I think I'm a lot more mentally prepared for it. From a business standpoint, like I think it's Taylor or maybe Andrew you had to work through in therapy, like disconnecting your outcomes and successful career. What I thought was 15 years of, building sales team, my gosh, at 3 different companies that worth over $1 billion at this point from early stages. And now all of a sudden I can't even take a business doing $1 million and do anything with it. And disconnecting all of that to say, like, what's my actual worth here as a human versus what I contribute to the world. And I thought my contribution to the world was being successful, right? And whatever that meant. And so it was like really hard to work through, and realizing there's a lot more to than just building business. And I'd say, even this year, as we go into like a second version of the J curve, I have a lot more confidence and understanding that my worth is not connected to whatever happens to that business. That's like one small aspect of my life, but I can do other things. And ultimately, thankfully, I can pay my bills in other ways, through other businesses and things like that. So anyway, it was a hard time in my life.
Blake, I can't thank you enough for being so open and for sharing your journey with us. And, the moment you talked about you and your wife saying, hey, if we lose everything, we're going to be okay, reminded me of one of my favorite quotes that I heard earlier in my life. And it goes something like this. It says, imagine how happy you'd be if you lost everything you now have and then got it all back. And I think there's a moment for all of us where you go through something like this and you realize that we do have a lot to be grateful for, despite how challenging this journey can be. And what a great example of perseverance and grit through some really, really challenging trials. Caroline, if you can, bring us home. It's been quite the journey, as we've heard the journey of these amazing individuals, and excited to hear how you've navigated these last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the good fortune, at least of hearing Andrew's story before, and Blake's. A lot of these are very familiar, and how awful it can be. But holy shit, the resilience of these folks. So I commend them. I commend everybody who goes into this, because you find those new low lows. I've had that conversation with my wife of cardboard box under the bridge, kind of, we lose everything. What do we got? And you quickly do realize, well, we got each other. We have family we love. There's so many more things outside of this silly treadmill that we've chosen, which is the hardest part. We've chosen to do this to ourselves. And so, yeah, I resonate with a lot of that. For me, the J curve, coming into the military industrial complex, I didn't think it was so much about automation. I think as I stepped into the business, I wanted to, quote unquote, stabilize it. And I made the what I now realize, false assumption that I could outwork, outmaneuver, outadapt any of these companies in this defense industrial complex, because I'd worked inside of them and I'd seen what a slow, dumb company acts like. And dumb, not to say that, I mean, they're incredibly smart people, but when you get a big entity of 50,000, 100,000 people, it can't act in a flexible, adaptable way. And I knew I had a small company with a lot of really brilliant people that could outmaneuver. I also know we demonstrably have a superior product. It works better. It hits all the performance metrics beyond anything available in the market. And that's not enough. I had not factored in the inertia of this industry, and I don't think that's different of any industry, the inertia of existing contracts and existing comfort levels of customers with whatever they've gone with before. And so even if you're the new kid on the block offering this hot, new, shiny thing, it takes a while to build trust and belief. And so for us, that J curve had so many false summits and false valleys, where we thought we'd kind of surmounted this thing and then the next thing comes. I probably go through all the stories, but some of the creative ways that we've solved this, we've asked employees to trade pay for future time off. I've renegotiated rent several times. We've made personal loans to the business to get through cash crunches. I've actually now started forgetting all the creative ways that we've found a penny in the couch to keep the business rolling. But I'll give the one story because it's most recent. In 2025, we got doged. If you remember, in this administration, Elon Musk and all his friends got together and started axing things across the government. And we weren't directly axed, but all the funds basically seized up in federal contracting for a few months. And if you're a big company, it's an annoyance that you see in every administration in some way. If you're a little company, that could be a death sentence. And for us, it once again was a new low on the J curve. And so a contract was canceled, other millions of dollars were pushed out, and there was no more penny to squeeze. And so I brought all of my employees in, I think in February of 25, and said, I love you. I've told you everything. I've taken you on this journey. And now I've got to ask something even harder. I have to furlough all of you. I'm sorry. There was no way to cushion this blow. Please come back this summer if I can get the contracts. I think we had a barbecue or something to be kind. I'm kind of playing it nice, but I think the thing that worked best, so to kind of fast forward through that, furloughed them in February, brought everyone back in July, and everyone came back, which was, wow. I mean, if you think of some of these people, these are hourly workers living in Silicon Valley. That's a big ask. And they all came back, which was amazing and is the reason we exist today. And I think that only happens because I had built so much trust and proven, me and my partner and everybody in the business, that we will do everything in our power. We won't take pay. We definitely didn't take pay for a lot of times, long before we furloughed them, that we will do everything in our power to make sure that you get paid and have a stable job. And having seen that through now, I really do believe we're on the other side of that J curve. Things in the geopolitical environment has certainly helped us make that leap. So I hope this is another false summit. It really does feel different. And it's nice to finally feel a different pain of growth instead of pain of scratching for the pennies. So I will end with hopefully maybe a positive spin on what is usually this tough emotional roller coaster. I've had many of the things that the gents here have mentioned. I had weird leg pain that can only be described by anxiety after months of going to the doctor. Did panic attacks, found a new level of insomnia. I took myself to the ER one day one night at 2 a.m. because I just hadn't slept in so long. I was delirious. That didn't fix it. And done therapy and all that. So it gets real rough. But on the positive spin of it, we kind of touched on it here. You have these conversations with your spouse or whatever your support group is of, what if, on one side it feels like, oh, what if I could just let it all go in a positive way? What if I could just be done with this thing called bankruptcy, whatever? And you realize what is important. But I think you also find that when you put yourself through the ringer like this, you could be an Olympian athlete, you could be an Ironman. When you put yourself to these extremes that you never knew you could do, you find that they're really hard and you find uncomfortable things about it, but you find such better ways to live your life. I now know the things that are important to me. I know how to deal with stress in a better way. I know how to lead people through some horrendous things. And so I've just come out so much stronger, and whatever happens next in life, I'm more excited because I feel like I'm on stable foundation, having gotten my world rocked many times. And so I'm super eager about the next chapter. And I hope it's not another punch in the face, but if it is, I'm feeling good about it.
Caroline, what an inspiring message. Thank you so much. One of the maybe least intelligent humans to ever live had one of the most profound quotes ever. It was a guy named Mike Tyson who said, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And every one of us here on this call have been punched in the face many times. And every one of you has stood back up despite the trials. We're way over time. I apologize for that, but I need to ask one last question to everyone. It can be answered in a simple yes or no. If you're to go back, this is Caroline back to business school, Blake back to your SaaS selling and building days, Andrew back to your private equity world, and Taylor back to Goldman Sachs. Do you do this again? Would you have made this choice to go out on this journey of ETA, or would you have stayed in the relative comfort of where you were living before? Let's start with you, Taylor.
Oh yeah, 10 times over. I'd do it again.
It's amazing. About you, Blake?
Yeah, I would. I definitely do it again. Will do it again, but there were many moments where I realized I don't think I would do this ever again. But even now, going maybe a second J curve, I'd do it again.
And part of this answer is obviously we would do things different. It doesn't mean that you do things the exact same. We've learned from this, but would you stay or would you go? And so far, two have said they would go. What about you, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a laundry list of things I would do differently, but I would take the hit in the face again.
Wow. And Andrew, what about you?
100%. I am a completely different and improved, better version of myself because I've gone through all this. And, people say I'm crazy for wanting to do this again, but what is life if we're not willing to bend, flex, break, repair, and improve ourselves? And I see no better way than to put yourself through the ringer through ETA.
What an amazing way to close a fantastic session. This world of ETA is a wild roller coaster of emotions, and it is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, for the five of us on this call, it's the hardest path that we could have chosen. Yet all five of us would say, and I would add to that, I would do it again despite all the hardships that I've been through. And so if you're considering this route, then know that it's going to be hard. And that it's not going to be anything like, you may hear on some podcast or see on some Instagram post, but that in all likelihood, despite the challenges, it will likely be worth it. So we would invite you to join us on this wild world of ETA, and we're happy to help you. I know that any of these people on this call are willing to take a call or spend some time talking more about our journey and give advice of things we would have done differently had we done it again. But we can all join in unison and say, yeah, the hard road is sometimes the best road. And so thanks everyone for your time. Blake, Caroline, Taylor, Andrew. I've been inspired. I've been brought to tears. I've seen emotions that I didn't expect to get from a podcast call like this, but we appreciate you sharing your whole selves and also the journey that you've been on. So thanks everyone. We'll see you soon.